Okay, so let's get started. It's a pleasure for me to be here to introduce to you Simon Lilly, who probably needs no introduction to most of you. He's been a professor here in the physics department since 2002. And during that time as a colleague, he's played many roles. In particular, he was head of department between 2015 and 2017. Scientifically, Simon's played a long-standing pioneering role at the forefront of observational astronomy, for which he's been recognized by many awards. I think notable of those were election as a Fellow of the Royal Society in 2014, and his receiving the Herschel Medal of the Royal Astronomical Society in 2016. So Simon, thanks very much for your services to the department over many years, and we look forward to hearing your retirement lecture.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan, for that kind introduction, and thank you for many of you coming. It's been very nice to see old friends and colleagues. Good evening. For all of my working life, I have had the great privilege to be an observational astronomer. I talk to you today at my farewell lecture as a person who has been a professor for almost 40 years at 3 different universities in 3 different countries, and also working at a senior level in government. 40 years is a long time to make observations of our beautiful universe, and also observations of universities and their governance. I would have liked to tell you tonight about my observations of the distant universe, including observations with the fabulous new James Webb Space Telescope, observations which Physics World magazine hailed last December as one of the top 10 breakthroughs in physics of 2023. But I've decided instead to tell you about observations of my surroundings at the ETH Zurich. I witnessed the events that led to the first ever dismissal of a professor from the ETH, Marcella Carollo, a female professor whose husband I am. Much has been said about this case by the ETH and by the media, here and elsewhere, and also on social media. But for 7 years I have said nothing. This farewell lecture is my testimonial of what I observed. Why? Because I believe that what happened was wrong, and I would like to try to help to ensure that it never happens again. I came to the ETH Zurich in 2002, leaving behind my position as the Director General of the Canadian National Observatory. Marcella and I were hired together to build from scratch a new program in nighttime astronomy at the ETH. Many sexist words have been written about Marcella's appointment at the ETH, but we are talking of a scientist who both before and after coming to Zurich had a stellar career. Top fellowships in Europe and the US, then a professorship at the Ivy League, Columbia University. In 2018, just as her research career was on the cusp of being destroyed, Marcella was one of only 18 highly cited researchers at the ETH, those representing the top 1% of scientists in the world in their respective fields. And now, 6 years later, Marcella is still ranked by Research.com as being the top cited female scientist in Switzerland, and the top cited member or former member, male or female, of the Department of Physics. But a hostile environment of sexist belittlement is what Marcella encountered arriving at the ETH, as the wife of a male professor in a Department of Physics that in the quarter century after 1993 would hire 24 male professors and 0 female professors, apart from her own so-called dual career appointment, an environment in which female professors will be referred to as a toxic export and a source of radioactive contamination. Our response to this prejudiced environment and to other challenges that we faced was to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We did what we had been hired to do. The most recent external evaluation of the physics department wrote, Simon Lilly and Marcella Carollo built the Institute for Astronomy at ETH. Their efforts were exemplary, and they managed to build a world-class effort in observational astronomy with a strong supporting theoretical effort as well. That was written in 2020, but by then that world-class institute was gone and Marcella Carollo had been fired. How did we get to that point? I bring you to the last months of 2016. Marcella is having problems with the research progress of one particular PhD student. She decides she can no longer supervise this student through to a successful PhD. She offers a contract extension to help the student find a new position. She seeks and follows the advice of the Department of Physics. She involves the ETH legal office to protect the intellectual rights of all involved. Not a desirable situation by any means, but not so unusual. But then in early February 2017, Marcella is told that the student in question has presented a dossier of 9 accusatory testimonials. During a meeting that goes late into the night with the pro-rector and the acting head of the physics department, plus a passive director of studies, Marcella is told over and over that she has violated the so-called ETH compliance guide. She asks when, how, by doing exactly what, but they refuse to say. Then in early March, Marcella is called to a meeting with the Vice President for Personnel. She asks again to be told the facts. When and what exactly had she done wrong? These facts obviously are needed to address any accusations of misconduct. But once again, factual information is categorically denied. Next, the ETH Ombudsman, Wilfred van Gunsteren, intervenes. He sends Marcella a short document containing 14 anonymized extracts from the accusatory testimonials, ostensibly for her to comment. But these are so meaninglessly vague that it is completely impossible to respond except by asking for more information. Let me show you one example. Carollo did put herself as first author on papers written by others. Manipulating authorship. Images of objects obtained experimentally were manipulated on the computer to render them more convincing in regard to a particular hypothesis. Imagine this happened to you. Wouldn't you want to know which papers, which images, which hypotheses, so that you could address these accusations and clear your name? Marcella replies to van Gunsteren in writing, asking over and over to be given the information that would enable her to provide a meaningful and factual response. But Ombudsman van Gunsteren doesn't even bother to respond. Imagine a senior university official sends you accusations like these, but then doesn't give you any chance to address them. Or just imagine if a professor behaved like this towards a student. It is my opinion that this is abusive behavior in black and white. It is abusive psychological bullying by an ombudsman. And in my view, it has absolutely no place in a university or anywhere else for that matter. Before responding to van Gunsteren, Marcella had met once again with the Vice President for Personnel and asked to be allowed to clarify even just those 2 specific issues in Extract 12, both of which she absolutely knows cannot possibly be true. But no, once again, the Vice President refuses. Despite this appalling situation, Marcella agrees to undergo a program of personal coaching and to have a co-supervisor for future students, at least for a while. One can always improve with help. But of the real intensity and extent of the operation against her, she still has no idea, because there is a whole parallel ETH world of secret maneuvering going on, the existence of which she would only discover very much later. Let us look more closely at Ombudsman van Gunsteren in this parallel world. There are few roles in an organization more important than that of the Ombudsman. The ETH proclaims that their Ombuds Office adheres to the Code of Ethics and the standards of practice of the International Ombudsman Association. These stress the need for neutrality and impartiality for an ombudsman, of fostering respect for all employees, promoting procedural fairness, and of acting with integrity. Unknown to Marcella, right from the beginning, Van Gunsteren had, whatever his reasons, sided completely with the dismissed student. It was evidently he who had, quotes, motivated the multiple accusatory testimonials. And just a few weeks later, in February 2017, Van Gunsteren was already writing to selected members of the ETH Executive Board, notably excluding President Lino Guzella, declaring that he intended to put together a court-ready report on Professor Marcella Carollo. It is clear that putting together a legally robust case for the dismissal of an employee is not the task of an ombudsman, who should explicitly not participate in formal adjudicative, investigative, or administrative procedures. And note that this is several weeks before Van Gunsteren had sent Marcella his absurdly vague 14 extracts, exposing that particular episode as a complete charade. In those February messages to selected members of the Executive Board, Van Gunsteren also makes clear his personal antipathy towards President Guzella, alluding to the earlier President Hafen in the 2006 ouster of whom, I've been told, Van Gunsteren had apparently been involved as the head of a powerful department. It must be said that 2 years into his first 4-year term, Guzella is not a popular president, and there are many who would like to see him out. And so it is to this unpopular president that this non-impartial ombudsman writes in early May 2017, emphatically insisting on the dismissal of a professor whom he has denied any opportunity to clear her name, with whom he has never once met to discuss the accusations against her, and to whom neither he nor Guzella says anything about this demand for her dismissal. I ask myself, neutral, impartial, promoting procedural fairness as required by the Ombudsman Code of Ethics? I personally think that Van Gunsteren knew full well that President Guzella would refuse his demand. Indeed, Guzella would declare to the ETH Rat later that summer, 2017, that the ETH assessment was that a dismissal of Professor Marcella Carollo would be, quotes, neither appropriate nor justifiable, neither proportionate nor enforceable. Remember these words. But it is clear that Guzella is now under personal pressure. Just a few days after receiving Van Gunsteren's demand, Guzella summons Marcella and me to a meeting at which he tells us that our Institute for Astronomy is to be dissolved forthwith. Our 15 years of, to quote that external evaluation, exemplary effort is to be chucked into the bin. There is to be no discussion of this. This drastic action is a done deed. Marcella and I will be independent professors in the Department of Physics, and the other 4 astronomy professors will be merged into another institute of the department. After confusedly flip-flopping back and forth, Guzella insists that these highly visible actions must be announced as due to Marcella's alleged misconduct, even though, and this he knows full well, there has been no investigation whatsoever into whether the allegations are true or false. It is obvious that these changes are intended and will be seen as a punishment. The Department of Physics will indeed change its regulations to ensure that our new positions will, in the words of the new Physics Department head, be not attractive. I ask Guzella whether there have been any complaints about me, and he says no, none. So why am I being punished and the institute being disbanded? Guzella mumbles, the department wants it. And that is evidently enough. Indeed, much later it will become clear to us that for months the new management of the physics department and Van Gunsteren will be marching in lockstep, coordinating their secret maneuvering while keeping us unaware of what they are doing. So to the psychological abuse of hidden accusations, we can now add actual punishment for hidden accusations, or in my case, punishment for no accusations at all. Only a very few colleagues react to this with any concern at all. 2 brave female colleagues do try to put together a petition at a meeting of the ETH female faculty asking for due process, that the accusations should be investigated before any irrevocable action is taken. But, witnesses tell me, the 2 most senior women present, the rector Sarah Springman, and the associate vice president actually responsible for gender issues at ETH, quickly squashed this initiative. And by the way, in this whole story, neither of these 2 will see fit, even once, to contact Marcella, one of the few female professors at the ETH, to understand her point of view. In my opinion, an eloquent testament to what are the real gender issues at this university. You can imagine the emotional torment, the mental distress, and the physical fatigue from the sheer powerlessness of being accused, judged, and punished while being prevented from presenting any evidence to address the still hidden accusations. Psychologists studying workplace mobbing observe that when the target person eventually shows, quote, symptomatology due to the torment, in Marcella's case, 2 emotionally written emails she sent in a moment of distress to a few close collaborators, this will be seized upon and the target blamed also for the psychological torment. This is especially the case when the target is a female, quote, in the same way that a battered wife is blamed for the abuse that she has suffered in the hands of her husband. Relentlessly, Van Gunsteren keeps going with his plan and now takes his dismissal demand to the ETH RAT President Fritz Schießer, adding also accusations against President Guzella. And once again, neither Van Gunsteren, nor Schießer, nor Guzella see fit to inform Marcella Carollo about this demand. Van Gunsteren also tells Schießer that he foresees the involvement of the press. And I think it should be obvious that should the press get involved, what has been a case of the simple truth or falsehood of accusations against a professor will be transformed into a matter of politics, in which image and propaganda for an institution may come to outweigh truth and justice for an individual, and in which other political goals can be pursued and achieved. Let me give you a summary chronology up to this point of both the story as known to us and the still hidden parallel world of which we knew nothing on the right. As had been predicted, in October 2017, the local NZZ am Sonntag publishes an article about what it calls bullying by Marcella Carollo and the closure of the Institute for Astronomy. Suffice it to say that that article and those that followed were stuffed with sexism and sensational falsehoods about Marcella and about me. The response of the ETH is to put out a press release. Let me highlight the key words. At the same time, the executive board confronted the professor about the allegations and listened to her version of events. But I ask you, how can a professor possibly have given her version of events if everyone, acting head of department, pro-rector, ombudsman, vice president, president, has systematically, emphatically, and absolutely refused to provide any factual information, the who, what, when, where of the events in question? Just think of the image manipulation and the writing of the papers. How can she possibly have given her version of those if she was not told which image and which papers? And the same for all of the other things. And there is this other long paragraph. It says that the Institute for Astronomy had been disbanded because Carollo and I were professors in the same institute, and that the top priority had been to rectify these, quote, problematic circumstances. Many people quite reasonably concluded from this press release that the ETH's drastic action of closing an entire institute indicated A, that very serious misconduct had been established through due process, and B, that we had both been involved. Unfortunately, neither of these was true. Inevitably, a feeding frenzy erupted on social media, demands that neither of us ever be invited by anyone to anything ever again. Devastation of our reputations, complete ostracization. And there, standing in the front rank of this vicious and destructive mob on social media, were many of those individuals who, we would later learn, were those whose identities and secret accusations the ETH had been so assiduously hiding because the ETH said they were vulnerable. And so, despite all Marcella's earlier refused requests for a factual examination of the accusations against her, it is only now, after the story has been recast from the factual into the political, that the ETH-RUT orders the ETH management to carry out not one, but 2 investigations. But now is very late. Investigations to take place only after the implementation by ETH of very visible and drastic actions, only after a devastating trial by media, only after the ETH's own, in my view, highly misleading press release, and only after our destruction on social media. And astonishingly, investigations to be preceded by the Ombudsman van Gunsteren writing to a large number of potential participants, referring to Marcella Carollo's behavior as, quote, utterly disrespectful and non-professorial, telling them of the improper way that the president had handled it, and informing them that the purpose of the investigation was, quote, in order that the allegations be confirmed. A revealing choice of word that, confirmed, not investigated. I ask you again, is this ombudsman behavior? In such a poisoned atmosphere, in such a politically loaded environment, will it be possible to have a fair investigation? It would have required a great deal of self-confidence and moral courage to have ensured that. So let me focus first on the first investigation, the so-called administrative investigation, which was announced in the October 2017 press release and carried out by a lawyer from a Bahnhofstrasse law firm, paid, of course, by the ETH. It would take 6 months for this lawyer to interview Marcella and soon after to deliver the documentation that finally enables her to counter allegations with factual evidence, and for her to finally gain some insight into the hidden maneuvering of the Ombudsman, the head of the physics department, and other ETH officials. But a factual response from Marcella was evidently not desired, because just 2 days after delivering this documentation, the lawyer delivers his draft report. A long series of unsupported statements and accusations listed in the first part, and then later referenced in the second part, as if they had become established facts, followed by a recommendation that Marcella be dismissed without warning. Marcella submits a detailed response, some 90 pages with 350 pages of supporting documentary evidence. And what does the lawyer do? A few words added here and there, usually to the effect that Carollo had disputed this or that, no significant changes, his conclusion unchanged. You can read this report. The ETH later released it, citing the public interest and transparency. But it should be noted without attaching Marcella's response. As others have commented, partial transparency is no transparency at all. Since time is short, let me just quote the politically restrained words about this report that were written by the commission that President Guzella later convened to recommend, on the basis of this same report, whether Marcella Carollo should be dismissed. The report did not always paint an impartial picture. Too much weight given to negative comments. Statements providing neutral or positive comments featured only occasionally or not at all. Quotes taken out of context or cited in isolation, a noticeable use of leading questions. In conclusion, as a result of this procedure, it is impossible to rule out that the overall picture of the circumstances in the former Institute for Astronomy may have been distorted. And the resulting recommendation on dismissal was clear. The Commission recommends Professor Carollo should not be dismissed. And by the way, buried deep in that report, the problematic circumstances of us both being in the same institute, which in the ETH press release had been the reason for the closure of the institute, were said to have played no role at all. So was this just malicious corridor gossip, deliberately made up? It was used to destroy a world-class institute and my own career. Let us now go back in time to September 2017. Remember the mysterious second investigation ordered by the ETH Rat. This had not been revealed, neither in the October press release, nor to Marcella herself. A secret investigation, secretly ordered and secretly carried out. It concerns scientific integrity, the core value in science, the personal core value for any reputable scientist, and the core value, one would hope, of any reputable university. As a result of the secret order from the ETH Rat, the so-called confident Bernard Plattner, a kind of scientific ombudsman, trawls through the testimonials searching for accusations of scientific misconduct. He puts together his secret report and presents it to the ETH Executive Board. Neither Plattner nor the Executive Board see fit to contact the accused professor for any clarifications. Instead, they drop a bombshell. 17th of January 2018, it is now 4 months after the Rat order, and the other investigation by the Bahnhofstrasse lawyer has not yet begun. Marcella is summoned to President Guzella's office, where he and the Vice President for Research, Detlef Günther, communicate that she is being suspended from the university with immediate effect, and that her remaining research group is to be immediately disbanded. Why? Because the ETH is now launching a formal investigation into what it calls corroborated suspicions of scientific misconduct. Guzella makes the meeting very short. He is rushing to announce this sensational development to the Department of Physics, excuse me, and then to the world in a press release 1 hour later. As the press reports, the accusations are now getting heavy. Let's look at the charge sheet that was handed to Marcella Carollo on that day. Look at the first charge. The infamous manipulated image is now back. And at last, after almost a year, we finally learn which image it is. The details here I've deleted. I can tell you that it took us 10 minutes with our laptops, maybe less, to find the original images and to prove that this accusation was complete and utter garbage. The images in that proposal had certainly not been manipulated, neither by Carollo nor by anyone else. What do you think? Should a university suspend a professor, disband her research group, and publicly humiliate her in a press release based on an accusation that she has fraudulently manipulated scientific images without once seeing the claimed manipulation, as Plattner admitted he hadn't, without once asking the professor about it, or retrieving the original data that is always easily available from the NASA archive? Let's look at the second charge. Again, just a few minutes going through her emails proves that Marcella had declared that conflict of interest. She had done so in writing, and she had done so twice, the second time to remind the relevant SNF official of the first. So that too was rubbish. But again, Plattner hadn't asked Marcella about this. He hadn't even picked up the phone and called the SNF just up the road in Bern. Corroborated suspicions? Where, I ask you, is any kind of due diligence in this? Note, these are the very first accusations since the beginning of the story for which the ETH discloses the essential details, the who, what, when, where. And since it took Marcella just 10 minutes to easily and decisively disprove them, one has to ask, why was it that the head of department and the prorector and the ombudsman and the vice president and the president and the rectorin had not wanted to clarify these allegations when they had first been presented a full year earlier? Why had all these ETH officials so strenuously resisted examining the presented accusatory testimonials for truthfulness? Why? And note also that these first two so easily disprovable accusations had come from two testimonials that had been solicited from people who had left the ETH more than a dozen years previously. Testimonials that had been used to construct the ETH narrative of Marcella's decades-long alleged misconduct. And what of Marcella's other charges? What of Plattner's other charges? These last three bullets are still as vague as ever. They will eventually be expanded into 11 specific charges. Marcella will have to wait until November 2018. That is, can you believe it, almost 10 months after her suspension and the associated ETH press release. And after this 10-month delay, Marcella is given precisely 11 days to respond, with no extension to be granted. Despite this rush, Marcella proves that every single one of the 13 charges of scientific misconduct that have been brought forward by the ETH confidant Bernard Plattner is false. She will be informed that the investigating committee of scientists had found, quotes, no evidence of scientific misconduct. And of course, the factual evidence that Marcella had presented to completely disprove Plattner's allegations of scientific misconduct was very similar, sometimes identical, to that which she had presented to the lawyer in the other investigation, but in that case with no effect at all. So why did the ETH hide the details for 10 months and then suddenly demand the rush of 11 days? Of course, there is always the possibility of gross incompetence. But it is a fact that Marcella finally gets the needed information just the day after Guzella announces to the world in yet another ETH press release that he is convening the commission to consider the historic first-ever dismissal of a professor from the ETH. I ask you, can one avoid the suspicion that this whole business of suspending the professor and publicly announcing a formal investigation into scientific misconduct was never really about scientific misconduct at all? Was it just a way to keep Marcella away from the ETH for a year until the report from the other investigation had been delivered and the dismissal commission could be convened? A pretext to disband her research group, destroy her decades-long research program, and create a scorched earth around her so as to facilitate her eventual dismissal. And a way to further prejudice her immediate environment at ETH against her at the very start of the other investigation, and to disgrace and isolate her within the international research community, and to further blacken her in the Swiss media and even within our own local community. In short, was this whole operation a weapon, a secret weapon, unleashed to destroy the soul and the persona of a scientist with a spotless record of 25 years of integrity in scientific research? Easily disprovable accusations of scientific misconduct, if these were used to destroy a scientist, then this would, in my opinion, be an irredeemable disgrace for all the individuals involved. They would have betrayed the core value of science and the core value of this distinguished university. And before leaving scientific misconduct, let me say that there was, in fact, verified scientific misconduct in this story, but it was not committed by Marcella Carollo, and nothing was ever done or publicly said by the ETH about that case of verified scientific misconduct. And so we come to the end of this story in March 2019. By then, President Guzella is finally out. The ETH-RAT appoints a new ETH president, Joel Mizot, himself a long-time member of that same Department of Physics at the ETH. And so it is Mizot who summons Marcella Carollo to inform her that the dismissal commission has recommended she not be dismissed and that she has been cleared of any scientific misconduct. But that, despite these, he has decided to proceed with the dismissal. He will write to the ETH-RAT, quote, apart from the fact that Professor Carollo currently no longer has a research group, neither the professors nor the other members of the Department of Physics, especially the doctoral students, would understand a decision to reinstate Professor Carollo in the department. And the ETH-RAT duly does dismiss, for the first time ever, a professor from the ETH. Marcella appeals to the Federal Administrative Court, hoping for justice. This court takes an inordinate 2.5 years to deliver its judgment in April 2022. As the ETH had itself assessed way back in the middle of 2017, Marcella's dismissal is judged by the court to have been disproportionate and unjustified. But that is not enough in Switzerland to get your job back. Despite the story that I have related, the dismissal is judged not to have been illegal, and despite male professors seemingly being treated differently, not to have been gender discrimination. But there are people in Switzerland concerned about what they see happening. A very distinguished Swiss citizen, with whom Marcella and I have absolutely no connection whatsoever, a citizen with a decades-long record of upholding Staatsrecht in this country, writes to the presiding judge, I have rarely seen such a density of contradictions within a decision of the federal court. The judgment is in the service of system protection, Systemschutz. The ETH must not be criticized, even if its actions were not only abusive, for example, the media campaign, but clearly illegal. In my opinion, from the point of view of the rule of law, this is an extremely regrettable, even a shameful judgment. We decided that a legal appeal was not possible for us, neither emotionally nor financially. And besides, when a system has entered Systemschutz, one cannot trust that system any longer. But in any case, let us not gloss over those two words, disproportionate and unjustified. The first ever dismissal of a professor from the ETH was judged by the court to have been disproportionate and unjustified. If I had been the ETH president, I would have resigned. So was the Carollo case a case of courageous whistleblowing, or a coordinated malicious attack on a professor initiated by a dismissed student? How can you tell these two apart? Only by determining whether the presented allegations are true or false. And that can only be done through a fair examination of factual evidence presented by both sides. And if someone makes objective, factually disprovable accusations that are then proven to be false, or at best malicious distortions of the truth, surely that person is no longer credible when it comes to more subjective statements. Their malicious intent discredits these entirely. And even if multiple people say the same subjective things, that cannot be taken as evidence that those subjective things are actually true, especially when statements have been actively solicited within a conflict situation and may have been so easily coordinated. You must look at the factual evidence. Good management knows this. You know, about 6 months before this story started at the ETH, remarkably similar accusations to those at ETH had been presented at a university in the United Kingdom. Again by multiple accusers, again against 2 astronomers, another couple. There, the management straight away initiated a proper internal investigation. The accused professors were told the accusations and the identities of their accusers. so that they could submit their own evidence. And the outcome, the couple were cleared of all accusations, and the investigator found it hard not to conclude that the complaints had been maliciously presented. And by the way, there was a direct connection to the Carollo case. One of the malicious attackers in the British case is known to have been a friend of the dismissed student at ETH. And the day the NZZ Am Sonntag article appeared, it was this same individual who rushed to inform more than 1,000 astronomers worldwide, denouncing Marcella and me as the bullies in the article, triggering the tidal wave of destruction against us on social media. The management of that British university was determined to treat everyone with fairness, accusers and professors alike. That is good management of a public institution. Unfortunately, it is not what happened at the ETH. At the ETH, several officials became actively involved. They motivated further accusations. They did not carry out the required procedures at ETH for mediation and conflict resolution. And in fact, they worked together to expel the professor from the university. There's a huge literature on what is called academic mobbing, which usually leads to the expulsion of an academic from their position. This is typically achieved through the emergence of a hostile alliance completely surrounding the targeted person, supervisees below, the university management above, and all around the side, the colleagues. A diverse alliance that coalesces to pursue different gains, an alliance that easily expands the number of accusers by exploiting peer sympathy and peer pressure, as well as envy, resentments, and opportunities for gain. An alliance that systematically dehumanizes the target inside and outside the workplace. According to these studies, academic mobbing is very often characterized by secrecy, consequential actions based on rumors and gossip, punishments for alleged crimes which remain deliberately uninvestigated, the use of disparaging language and circulation of defamatory falsehoods, different interest groups coordinating in secrecy whilst keeping the target unaware of what is happening, and a final convergence of interests leading to a, quote, Stalinist show trial of predetermined guilt. As you have seen, these all figure prominently in the Carollo case, which is now recognized by experts in the field to be a textbook example of academic mobbing. I refer you, for example, to the 2021 public lecture by Professor Kenneth Westhouse, one of the leading scholars of academic mobbing. These experts emphasize that academic mobbing represents a serious institutional deficiency. A healthy organization with sound governance has the checks and balances to ensure that conflict situations are not exploited, but rather are contained and resolved. But for this, healthy organizations must have rules and procedures, and they must follow them equally for everyone. In the Carollo case at ETH, rules and procedures completely ignored or applied selectively depending on who or what was at stake, consequential meetings without minutes, secret networks of communication between informal power groups, decisions and actions kept secret until unilateral last-minute communications, a complete lack of transparency. In short, a good governance vacuum. A governance vacuum with at least 3 aggravating factors, at least one ETH official operating, in my personal opinion, far beyond the ethical boundaries. A problematic situation at the very top of the organization and within our own institute. An individual who, I was told by the president, was using his close connections to the media and political spheres to try to secure a permanent professorship at the ETH, which he badly wanted, whatever the cost to others. And although these 3 aggravating factors might be thought to have been unique to 2017, they are, in my opinion, each a manifestation of deep-rooted systemic weaknesses at the ETH. My own view is that the Carollo case was manipulated from the very start, and that as a result of an inept management response to that manipulation, A situation emerged by the middle of 2017 in which any outcome in which Carola was not declared guilty and dismissed would have exposed the wider problems of the ETH and thus threatened the reputation of a jewel of the country. I myself suspect that the decision that Marcella must be dismissed from the ETH was actually taken at about the time that the matter was transformed, in my opinion intentionally, from the factual to the political by mobilizing the press. If so, then everything that followed was preordained. And it was undoubtedly Marcella who was the vulnerable one in this environment, with many cumulative factors stacked against her. A foreigner from southern Italy, despite her taking out Swiss citizenship, with the envy and sexist stigma of a so-called dual career appointment, even as an astronomer working in a physics department, but most of all, a high-achieving female immersed in a highly male-dominated culture. Marcella's courageous determination to address factually accusations that she suspected to be false was from the very beginning used as evidence of an additional crime, of refusing to acknowledge her guilt, of being uneinsichtig in the ETH's lexicon. History has heard such arguments before and found them wanting. And you may be wondering, does this sort of thing in the end matter beyond the destruction of a professor or two? Yes, I think it does. Universities are training the next generation of scientists and leaders. These should not receive the message that lies and deception are okay, provided that you are aligned with the powerful, or that respect is for some but not for others, or that academic standards can be circumvented by presenting accusations against your supervisor. And at a deeper level too, it is very concerning to observe universities in the vanguard of the erosion of the most basic constitutional protections of due process, due diligence, and equality of treatment that underpin any democratic society. I have learnt of many cases of academic mobbing occurring since 2017. The vast majority have involved attacks on senior, successful women scientists. Many of the targets have also been foreigners who had trustingly moved to a new country to work and to build. So many victims. My talk is dedicated to all of them. And also to those few truly courageous individuals, including some journalists, who have been prepared to stand up for justice, some of whom I know have suffered greatly as a result. Not least to the memory of our friend, Professor George Lake, and also to Professor Ursula Keller in the physics department of ETH. Her civic courage is truly an asset to the ETH and to this beautiful country and its generous people. Indeed, I dedicate my testimonial to every person, here and elsewhere, who believes in good governance, truth, and justice. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Vanessa.